Yes, I am ready. Thank you, Kathleen.
Great. Well,
That
welcome.
sounds that sounds that sounds very important this afternoon. I
Exactly.
appreciate that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be invited to talk with all of you today. And I would like to say that I also have to thank Neidler for funding this research through the Center on Knowledge Translation for Employment Research. And you might be able to tell by my introduction that employment for people with disabilities has really pretty much been my life's work and is very near and dear to my heart. But I must say that this study on knowledge translation and using Facebook is really one of my most satisfying research studies that I have participated in. So I'd like to just start with a comment, and you might think, why did we select individuals with traumatic brain injury as the targeted group that we worked with in Facebook? And one of the primary reasons for that, and I don't know whether all of you that are listening today are familiar with the RSA 911 closure reports that are produced every year, but right before we started this study, we found that only about a third of the individuals with traumatic brain injury who exited vocational rehabilitation did so with a successful employment outcome. And so we were concerned about those outcomes and really wanted to think about how knowledge translation could potentially impact those outcomes, although I must say we did not specifically measure any changes in those outcomes. But that is one of the reasons that we selected this particular targeted group. And I know that all of us here really probably know what the definition of knowledge translation is, but essentially what we have here on the slide is Neidler's definition from their long-range plan. And really the importance of knowledge translation really is that it addresses the real issues faced by people with disabilities, hence individuals with traumatic brain injury, and their employment outcomes was our concern. It offers information or solutions related to those issues. We were looking at potentially improving the knowledge of individuals with traumatic brain injury around employment and employment supports that they could achieve or receive through vocational rehabilitation and other agencies in the community. And knowledge translation is presented in ways that make it accessible and feasible for the users, and finally is disseminated or distributed effectively. So one of the important factors that I think we're all aware of is that knowledge translation specifically wants to address the needs of the users at each phase of the research. And I think that the really unique feature for me about using Facebook as a knowledge translation strategy, and sometimes I like to give people a takeaway point. So if you phase out and don't hear anything else I say today, I think my takeaway for today is that Facebook has the ability to engage the user of the knowledge that we are trying to give to them throughout the process, throughout the phases of our research. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So really, Facebook gives us daily interaction with our end users, as well as gives us ongoing feedback as to what they are getting out of the participating in the Facebook group. I think that there's been a lot of discussion. The first item on our slide is as far as why do we use Facebook for knowledge translation. I think there are many pros and cons, and if we took a poll right now, although we're not taking a poll right now, if we took a poll right now, we probably could all list a lot of the pros and cons for using Facebook for a knowledge translation strategy. But I think some of the things that I really thought about when we were first looking at setting up this this study, I was somewhat of a novice Facebook user myself, but really Facebook can address some of those issues that I hope people with traumatic brain injury have. Right before I sort of sat down to think about this presentation, I decided that I would Google social isolation and traumatic brain injury just to have a look and see if I could find anything on the topic, because obviously Facebook provides an opportunity for people to connect socially. And I found a rather interesting study that was just published in August of 2020, and it's not on my reference list. I apologize because I just found it. But it was a study done in England, and they looked at the English Community Life Survey, and what that survey found is that people with disabilities experience loneliness, a low perceived support, and social isolation at significantly higher rates than people without disabilities. And I'm sure that we all can relate to that right now within this current environment that we are living in, as far as just the feeling of social isolation and reaching out for ways that we can connect with other people, as in we are connecting today through Zoom, which otherwise we would not have been able to do. So really the pros for using Facebook as well for me was some of the automatic built-in features of Facebook, the email that you get when you post in Facebook, hopefully serving as a reminder for people with traumatic brain injury who have or may have memory concerns and issues, sort of somewhat like a natural cue for them. Immediate feedback from the participants, the ability to see who's looking at your post and who's commenting on your post. All of that feedback was a real pro for me. The very fact that everything that was posted throughout the history of our Facebook group stayed online for people to go back and review materials and resources that were provided was a real pro for me. And the other thing that I thought of really was, wouldn't people naturally have access to Facebook and be looking at Facebook, and we'll look at some information on that in a minute, instead of creating a website or location in a website where they would have to remember a username and password. So those were considerations that I had when I first looked at using Facebook. And I think we all can recognize the cons around the use of Facebook. Do people with disabilities have access to the technology? Do they have concerns about security? Do they have concerns about the truthfulness of the information that's being provided to them? That has certainly mushroomed over the last number of years. When we first did the study, we found some statistics on the reported use of Facebook, and this study was done around 2015, and 1.44 billion monthly active users were in 2015. As of May of 2020, there were 2.60 billion, so that's a pretty amazing increase. Today, there are about 1.73 billion daily active users, and at the time that we did this, there were 936 million active users. So, and then the final point, about 7 out of 10 adults in the U.S. claim that they use Facebook as of current statistics. So those are just some basic points, I think, about why use of Facebook, which perhaps all of you would have come up with if we had given you an opportunity to do so. So let's look at some background information about traumatic brain injury on the next slide, related to articles that had been produced about individuals with traumatic brain injury and the use of the internet. Now, I am going to admit right off that I am not 100% how to pronounce the names of the authors of these publications. And in fact, I went to Google and asked how to pronounce these names and came up with Spiegelman and Gill as the first reference that I'm using that you'll find at the end of this presentation, indicating that of their survey of 172 individuals with traumatic brain injury, they found that 69% said that they viewed Facebook at least once a day, and that 44.2% logged on for up to 30 minutes each visit. And another reference that we used for this work was, and I really don't know how to say this word, Shoshowasai, Matusawi, and Leibovich. So I apologize to those authors for distorting the pronunciation of their names, but they did a survey of 96 individuals with TBI and found that about 60% of their sample used Facebook regularly, and that 70% reported that they had a need to increase the knowledge of Facebook, and 50% said that they were interested in using Facebook. So I'd like to wake all of y'all up and call for my first poll if I could. And I want y'all to look at my first poll before we go to the next presentation. And I'd like for you to answer, how often do you use Facebook? And you have a number of choices if you would select one of those. I do not use Facebook. I rarely use Facebook. I use Facebook 1 to 4 times a month, at least once or twice a day, at least 3 or 4 times a day, or I use Facebook more than 5 times a day. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So when we did this study, we had a pre-questionnaire for our participants to ask them some questions and learn more about them, obviously engaging them for knowledge translation as well. And we asked them how often they used Facebook. So this represents the information from our study participants, and there were 67 of those individuals. And about 82%, if you add the 30%, 25%, and 27% at the bottom, the ones that said at least once a day, at least 3 or 4 times a day, and more than 5 times a day, you get about 82% of our participants said that they used Facebook at least once or twice a day, or up to more than 5 times a day. So we had a sample that was interested in using Facebook. And then a lower percentage, very low percent of only 3% said that they did not use Facebook. 6% said that they rarely used it, and 9% said that they used it 1 to 4 times a month. So let's have our next poll, if we could. In our second poll, what I'd like you to consider is whether you use Facebook to find information on services and supports on employment for individuals with disabilities. And your options here are: I never use Facebook to find information on employment. I use Facebook once or twice a month. I use Facebook 3 to 4 times a month. Or I use Facebook one day or more often to find information on employment. Okay, could we have the results of our first poll yet? Is that possible? So we can see how similar people are to our study sample. It looks like that the majority of our group, or about 38%, use it once or twice a day. So this compares somewhat to the group of individuals that participated in this study, just to get y'all active and involved in what we're talking about here today. And we have a few people that use it more than 5 times a day. I probably must confess that I fall into that category, but I belong to quite a few groups. Okay, let's go on to the next slide and look what our study participants said about using Facebook to find employment information. And as you can see, really, a very high percentage of our participants said that they never used Facebook to find information on employment. And I would say that prior to doing this study, I would say that I probably fell in that group with the 62% of our participants who said that they never used Facebook. And then only 9% said that they used Facebook daily or more often to find information on employment. And a very few, 15% once or twice a month, 14% said 3 or 4 times a month. Since doing this study, I've joined all kinds of groups that provide employment information. And in fact, I used that quite heavily, relied on that quite heavily when we were conducting the Facebook study. Could we see the results of our second poll? See what people say? Y'all are right in line with what the individuals in my study said, that you never use Facebook to find information on employment. At a very high percentage of participants, at 78%. So a little, about 13% of you use it once or twice a month, 4% of you use it 3 times a month, and 5% say you use Facebook daily or more often. I would say that I fall now mostly in that category, the next to the last category. I use Facebook 3 to 4 times a month to find information. So those are just things for us to think about when we consider using Facebook for a knowledge translation strategy. We had 2 research questions that we considered when we did this study. The first is social media, specifically a secret Facebook group led by peer mentor, effective in increasing the knowledge and use of evidence-based research on employment of individuals with TBI. And the second, what is the relationship between participant demographics and the effectiveness of the KT strategy to impact evidence-based employment knowledge and use by individuals with disabilities? Some of those demographics included length of time since their injury, their age, and others that we'll look at a little bit later. When we did the study, private groups were referred to as secret groups, and they're now referred to as private and hidden in search is the name of the type of group now. For those of you interested in the type of research methods that we used both quantitative and qualitative methods. We did a pre- and post-test control group design or random control design. We collected data, prior to beginning the study. We also looked qualitatively at the number of posts and comments that were made, both by the mentors of the group, as well as the tone of the comments, number of comments, and so forth. And we did a satisfaction survey at the end of the study for the Facebook group. One thing that I probably didn't know until I looked most recently, since they had changed from calling it a secret group to a private group, and it says their number of posts and views. As long as your Facebook group has less than 250 members, you will actually be able to see who has viewed each one of the posts, and obviously the like feature that you all are familiar with. But I really hadn't been aware that there was a number cap on being able to know exactly who viewed your post. We did not do this. A point I wanted to mention that I had not mentioned is that we did not do pre-approval of the post, which you also can do in a private group. the first day of the study, I had that feature on, and I got a number of messages asking why their post wasn't available immediately, and I felt it sent a message that we did not trust them. And so I took that off, and we never had any problems. I'm not saying that you wouldn't have problems, but we did not have any problems with people posting inappropriate content in the group, if that would be a concern for you. Just a little bit of the study details. The participants were recruited from Virginia Clubhouse Programs for Individuals with Traumatic Brain Injury and the Brain Injury Association listserv. And I'll talk a little bit later about the limitations of that and what that's probably one of the things that I would change the most in the study design if I were to do this over again. But we had TBI survivors. They had to be at least 18 years of age, their own guardian. And in the online consent process, they were aware that they were consenting to participate in a Facebook study, that's what this particular research was all about, and that they realized that their names would show in the group but would not be available on Facebook for others to see that were not members of the group. That's the purpose of a private group. Random assignment was done of the participants to a Facebook group and what we call the Business as Usual e-news group. And the Facebook group participated for 3 months in the intervention, and 5 times a week means that we had a goal of the mentors of the group posting at least daily, either myself or the other mentor. There were 2 mentors in the study. And for the e-news group, and I think I said we call that the Business as Usual group because that's a typical strategy for disseminating information to our stakeholders. We call that the Business as Usual group instead of a control group and giving the control group nothing. And they received information 1 time a month. And what I did as the lead person on this study, I looked back through all of the information that we had talked about in the Facebook group during the month and summarized that in a document that they received through e-news, those individuals in the e-news group. We used a random number generator to randomly assign the participants, and we had 34 participants in the Facebook group and 33 in the e-news group. And I didn't say that originally we had 121 participants agreed to participate, but we had a number of emails that we received from people that did not work when we began the study. We had one person that was sending inappropriate emails to the mentors prior to the study beginning, and that person was removed from the study. And we had a number of people that just never took the pre-test. So we offered the pre-questionnaire, I should say, prior to randomizing the participants into those 2 groups. I've already pretty much talked some about the confidentiality nature of Facebook because certainly there is an issue with that, and really high priority, not visible in searches for non-members, not indexed by Google, etc. As I've already mentioned, there were 2 group leaders, and I'll speed it up a little for those of you who may be worried about the fact that I have so many slides. I think when I started this presentation, I kept adding things that I wanted to say. And really, I will invite anyone to contact me later if they have questions on some of the information that I might kind of breeze over. But right before we did the study, and this is very important to spend a little bit of time on, we conducted focus groups as part of preparing for this study. And we had individuals with disabilities and focus groups, including people with traumatic brain injury. And some of the things that we asked them was, where do you get your information from? What information are you interested in? And in those focus groups, what we learned from the participants was that they wanted to receive their information from a trusted expert, such as a VR counselor, or a career advisor, or they wanted to receive information from another knowledgeable individual with a disability. And I was very lucky in this study to have Jay McLaughlin, who actually had been a user of our services at the RRTC when we had a traumatic brain injury project for individuals who wanted supported employment, or to have supported employment services. And Jay was actually one of the first individuals who received supported employment services from our traumatic brain injury project. And Jay went on to get his MS degree as a rehab counselor, and he actually serves as a mentor to other individuals with disabilities. So I was very lucky, going back to what we had learned from our focus groups, to have a trusted person to participate in this study and provide information from his perspective. And I've already said that that we had a minimum of one posting per day, and that we had used employment focus groups, and that the listserv went out monthly with that information. And before I forget to say this, I think it's very interesting to note, of the individuals that received the monthly e-news, and that was 33, only one person, and it was the same person, only one person ever responded to those email notifications that were sent out. So there was basically no interaction with that listserv group. So there was no feedback that we got from them saying whether there was any usefulness to that information. For those of you, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, and for those of you interested, we did do descriptive statistics. We did a paired t-test, independent t-test, and mixed model ANOVA to analyze our data at the end of 3 months. And 60 of our original 67 participants participated in that analysis and did both the pre and post test, 30 in each group. And I also should say that all of the participants received a $25 gift card at the beginning of the study and at the end of the study. I'm not going to spend time describing those things, because I'm sure that could be less interesting maybe than some of the other information that I have to share with you. For the qualitative analysis, we looked at really what was the content of the information and how people responded to it. I think that we counted communication between the research team members as well as the participants. And then we looked at coding the content as far as whether the responses were positive, negative, ambivalent to the information, and number of and type of communication. And I haven't said what were some of the things that we actually discussed in the group. And we talked about what resources you could get from vocational rehabilitation, assistive technology that you could use on the job. We talked about disclosure, interviewing techniques, interacting with employers and coworkers, discussing accommodations, as well as supported employment, since Jay had a background in supported employment and could talk to the participants about their interest areas. And really, I think the biggest, most important issue or point of using Facebook is the ability to do qualitative analysis on the information that people are posting. As you go along, you can learn what their knowledge needs are in real time. You can respond to the questions that they have. You can see what they, disclosure was a very big topic that people had, and their negative reaction to employers and coworkers, and talking about how we could interact with employers in a positive way to set up positive situations in the workplace. So that the ability to do that in real time was incredibly useful to me. I felt that I was providing information that people needed as opposed to my best guess as to what they might want. And again, I said earlier, takeaway points from this presentation, that really is one of the takeaways that I got from this study. And one of the things that I probably appreciated the most about being able to interact with the participants in the Facebook group. And one other real positive thing for me as we move on to the next slide, we won't spend a lot of time on some of these next couple slides, but one of the really good things for me was that when I was working at the office on other things, I had the pop-ups that would come and notify me when someone had posted in the group, because our goal was always to answer someone within 24 hours. And oftentimes during the week, I was responding within 10, 15 minutes of someone posting. So that to me was another real positive feature about being able to use Facebook as a knowledge translation strategy, is that immediate feedback that I could give to the participants. Jay was not as flexible about that because he had a job that he couldn't stop and set aside. So he typically would post things later in the day, but always within 24 hours. What this slide tells us is essentially that the Facebook group was equally balanced between female and male participants, while the control group, or the business as usual group that got the e-newsletter, were dominantly or predominantly female versus male. And for educational background, that was also pretty equally divided between those who did not have a college degree and those that did. What we found in the analysis was that there really was no statistically significant difference in the educational level or the gender when it came to the impact on the knowledge gained by the participants. The race ethnicity of our study, as you can see, was pretty predominantly Caucasian or white, with very low representation. I would say this obviously is a limitation of our study, and that would need to be addressed should you want to do something similar to address people from other ethnicities. But essentially what this meant was that the Facebook group and the control group both were similar as far as race was concerned. We also looked at, for analysis later on, and I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this, we looked at age, years since injury, number of jobs the person had had before their injury, and the number of jobs after their injury. And there were no, what all of these numbers say, so what does this really mean? And I'm not going to read the numbers to you. I hope that's okay. but there was no statistically significant difference between the Facebook and the e-news group on these demographics. Okay, so there's a lot of very technical information on this slide, and so what does it mean? And basically it says that over both there was a significant change in knowledge scores, with participants in both groups increasing their knowledge by the end of the study. And then we see a t-test score, a statistical, a p-value. We see the mean pre-test score and the mean post-test score. So basically, in a nutshell, what this means is that both groups in this study had a significant increase in their knowledge related to employment. However, the takeaway from all of this next information about the pre-post-test results by group, they're basically, as I just said, both groups increased their knowledge over time, but and the amount of change was knowledgeable for both groups, but there was no significant difference between the two groups. And I am going to move on so we can get away from the numbers and into discussing a little bit more, since I have not too much time. And that's basically that, again, there's no difference between the two groups. That's what this statistical analysis means. And I must give credit to Carolyn Graham, who was the other very important member of our team. She was our methodologist and our statistician that produced all this wonderful information that you can read more about if you would like to read our paper on this. So let's just move to the next slide, get some of this information. And essentially what this means when we analyze using a mixed model of ANOVA, analysis of variance, and we looked at as covariance number of years since injury, number of jobs before injury, number of jobs after injury, age, education, and gender, that there was no significant difference based on those as far as knowledge gain between the two groups. We had a very a pre and post knowledge test as part of our questionnaire that we used to analyze our study. And some of the areas that did not show any change was understanding what services could be provided through supported employment, knowing what services to expect from the supported employment service provider, and knowing what to do if your VR counselor says that you have a severe disability and you're not eligible for services. So we had quite a few participants who reported that they had been found ineligible for VR services, and I can't tell you why that was. And I know that we have a lot of, I think I saw a chat pop up in the chat that we had some VR counselors with us today. So this is not about criticizing VR counselors. It was more about trying to help people learn about what services that they could be advocates for themselves receiving as part of what we talked about in the Facebook study. In general, our participants said that they were satisfied with the Facebook study, and we had a very small group that actually took the or participated in the satisfaction survey. So these results are really limited to that. But that we had a high percentage agree that they thought the Facebook group information was relevant to them, that they thought it was a good way. 83% felt it was a good way to exchange employment information, and 91% really thought it was important to have a leader for the group. And even the qualitative information that we received from the participants in the group itself we continually got feedback from the participants post in this Facebook group that they really liked having Jay to talk to as far as the questions that were raised in the group, his experiences, his knowledge, that was probably one of the real important takeaways from the study. Now, people certainly responded to me. They certainly asked me questions. But if you were to delve down and look at the tone of the questions as we did for the qualitative analysis of it, it was very important to have Jay in that group as a member, as a mentor. The small sample that we had that said they didn't see anything that they needed to change. People wanted other people to be more visible in the group. We had certainly a number of people that looked at posts but never posted. One person said they wanted to focus only on work, which really I didn't really understand that feedback, but another suggestion was to have a topic each week that was focused on, which we did not do, which was really good feedback to have. Okay. This slide basically tells us that there was equal representative across the participants of the Facebook group. And I'm represented as the blue, Jay's represented as what's showing up as a maroon color on my slide. The members of the group are showing up as the green, and they actually did the highest percentage of the posts in the group, which was 37%. Jay was next at 31%, and I was last at 22%. Most of the time, I tried to maintain my post to posting a topic for the day to discuss, and if Jay didn't address a question of a group member that I had some feedback on, such as accommodations or how to talk with an employer, if Jay didn't answer those, then I would help out with those. But predominantly, I tried to let Jay be more of the leader than I was. This post just talks about what the content of the Facebook posts were. 32% were only about employment. The maroon, a very small percentage about people's skills, and a fairly large percent, 26%, was about their life story and their what we call non-employment posts. That was a particularly interesting feature of this study, in that participants wanted to talk to other participants about their traumatic brain injury. And that almost speaks to the social aspect of Facebook itself. It gave them a place to connect with other individuals with traumatic brain injury. Not a focus of this study. If I were to do this again, I certainly would probably want to have some measures about social connectedness, about the sense of belonging that they got out of participating in the Facebook group. But clearly, as you can see just from the percentage of posts related to their life story, that was a significant need for them. And then relaxing inspirational posts, those were just positive stories about people that were successfully employed. So it's kind of mixed with the employment post. I tried somewhat to put inspirational quotes about working up, and that's was included in those categories. You know, the quote that says, if you work at something you love, you never work a day in your life. You might have heard that quote. And every now and then I would throw out a quote like that and ask people what they thought about it. And those fell into the category of the relaxing inspirational post. Let's move on, because I'd like to get to probably some of the things that we learned and some of the things that, so let's go on to the next slide. I'd like to probably skip a couple of the next slides if we could. Perfect. Because I have a lot to say about some of this about ideas for future that might be more interesting, although certainly those quotes are interesting. But I think the first study limitation that was an issue really was related to the cognitive problems related to brain injury. Probably no surprise to anyone who is listening here. You know, the difficulty in understanding both written and spoken messages. And I did not mention that we posted links to websites. We posted brief paragraphs. We posted photo images of people working to talk about. We posted once a week. I did an interview with Jay, and those were called Tuesday with Jay, where we talked about a topic that had been prevalent in the group in the past week, and I would interview Jay about his interests. So I feel like I haven't talked very much about what we actually did in the Facebook group. Those Tuesdays with Jay were very well received, and I think very important to the group. So I think that the real advantages were that people could go back and they could access the information on their own schedules. But really, we did have memory challenges. And I think this comes up on another slide in a few minutes. I anticipated that the feature of Facebook putting an email in your email that said someone's posted in the group, and the pop-up feature of Facebook would be something that would be very helpful to our participants as far as engaging in the actual Facebook group. However, I think now, as I look back on it, it would be good if we did not incorporate tweets. We did not use other strategies. So looking at engaging people to look at the group's information through other strategies than just the ones that were available on Facebook would be very important. The intervention only lasted for 3 months, and we actually continued the Facebook group. I did a poll at the end of the 3 months, and after they had taken the post questionnaire, and I did a poll and I asked people if they would like to continue the Facebook group, and we got a high resounding yes, they would like to continue. So we actually extended the Facebook group for 6 months, and then we extended it for another 6 months. So all in all, it ran for a year, but we only have one post-test intervention data collection point. So I think that the brief nature of the intervention, we might have seen a difference in our outcomes if the intervention had been for at least 6 months instead of only 3. I think instrumentation, I've already mentioned that it would be interesting to include other factors that we looked at, the social interaction piece of using Facebook that we did not look at. If I were going to do this all over again, I would change the recruitment method and ask to work with VR counselors about working with people in a Facebook group with individuals on their caseloads who were actively seeking employment. the participants that we had all reported that they wanted to become employed when they joined the Facebook group. However, they were predominantly in Clubhouse programs. So I would like to do this study again and look at collaborating with either VR counselors or employment specialists and look at how Facebook might actually impact the use of the information that we were giving the group in real time. In other words, could they report how they were engaging with their VR counselor? Could they report how they were interacting with their employment specialist? So I think that's a real flaw in this study. However, I'm still really proud of this study, but I do think that is really, really important, and that gets to that use component of knowledge translation. How are people using the information? And so if I were, again, going to give you a takeaway point, I would suggest that you really think about that when using Facebook as a knowledge translation strategy. And I've kind of addressed a lot of these points already. I do think it was a good pilot study. I think I learned an incredible amount of information. I enjoyed it immensely as far as interacting with the participants. I think if I were to do this again, I would intersperse focus groups within the time period of the Facebook study. So I might do an initial focus group with all the participants in the Facebook group and also in the other group, and then at strategic points along the way have focus groups with the participants again to get ongoing communication and feedback from them. I think that would greatly enhance the study. I also think that it might provide more social connectedness between the participants, and perhaps they would feel more open to talking with each other, because again, we took a group of strangers and put them together in a social networking platform where they had not known each other previously. I think I would want to do more audio and video as opposed to as much written communication as we had, and I've already mentioned really adding to the instrumentation that we did and adding something about the social use of Facebook and the end users' opinions about that. On the last slide, there are a couple of references that you can look at, and I would encourage you to do so. I hope that you've gotten one or two ideas from this presentation this afternoon, and that you will feel free to contact me if you have any questions or if you just like to chat about this, because it is one of my favorite things that I enjoy chatting about if people ask questions about it. So with that, I'm going to, I guess, turn it back over to Kathleen and see if we have any questions.